After years of existing under our HOA's iron rule, they finally went too far, raising my dues for having too many cars in my own driveway. What they didn't realize was I had been quietly buying up properties in the neighborhood for years, and now the time had come to let Linda, our power-hungry HOA president, know who truly owned this community. But would she go quietly when I showed her my SE? Welcome to my channel, subscribe. If you want more HOA takedown stories, I never wanted trouble with the HOA. I really didn't. But when I found that bright orange notice taped to my front door last Tuesday morning, I knew this was war. My hands shook as I read it. Immediate HOA fee, increase $500 per month violation, excessive vehicles on property, 3 cars. That's what this was about. My work truck necessary for my construction business, my wife's SUV for her night shifts at the hospital, and the used Honda we just bought for our daughter's 16th birthday. 3 perfectly normal cars in our own driveway through the kitchen window. I saw Linda Marshall, our HOA president, on her morning inspection walk, clipboard in hand, measuring tape dangling from her wrist. She stopped at my driveway, pulled out her phone, and started taking pictures again, the 3rd time this week. Honey, she's out there again. My wife Emily called from the living room. Maybe we should just put the Honda in the garage. She said no, I said, emphatically pouring my coffee. We're not hiding our daughter's car like we're ashamed of something. Our garage was cluttered with Emily's medical equipment and my work supplies. Just as we had explained at the last HOA meeting, a meeting during which Linda sneered as I presented my case. Rules are rules, Mr. Carter, she had said, barely looking down from my phone. Maybe if you can't afford good garage storage, this neighborhood isn't for you. What Linda didn't know, what none of them knew, was that over the past 5 years, I had been systematically purchasing properties in the development under my real estate investment company. Each purchase made under different LLCs, concealing my growing control. It started out as a smart investment, but now it was something else, a scheme. A way to get back. I stepped outside to get the mail, walking slowly. Linda pretended to inspect Mrs. Avery's rose bushes and watched me out of the corner of her eye. Poor Mrs. A. Avery had been ticketed last month for having roses that were too vibrant and creating neighborhood color discord. My phone buzzed a text from my lawyer. Property closing final. You now own 67% of the development. I grinned and slipped my phone away, just as Linda Power walked up to me, clipboard clutched to her chest. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I trust you received our notice about the vehicle violation. I did, Linda, I said, keeping my tone even, and I have some questions about the legal basis for this fee increase. She waved a dismissive hand. The board has full authority to implement fees as needed. Perhaps if you attended more meetings, you'd see how these things work. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Little did she know I had attended every single meeting for the past 5 years by proxy representatives who own the houses I had secretly bought. I had sat back silently documenting each and every one of Linda's selective enforcements, each questionable charge, each abuse of power. As she turned to leave, heels clicking on the sidewalk, she called back over her shoulder. Oh, and the board is calling an emergency meeting tonight, 7 p.m. sharp. We'll be discussing next steps for problem properties. I watched her walk away, then pulled out my phone and texted my lawyer. Time to drop the papers we talked about Linda's making her move tonight. Just then my daughter pulled into the driveway. Linda stopped, took more photos, and strutted off. My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. Tonight would change everything inside. I spread out property maps on my desk. Each lot painstakingly highlighted 5 years of plotting, of gathering evidence, of watching Linda's reign of HOA terror get worse tonight. She would find that her biggest mistake wasn't coming after my family. It was underestimating me. The meeting room at the community center was packed. Every chair was filled with neighbors. Whispering to one another, Linda had outdone herself, even going so far as to bring in a professional photographer to take pictures of my driveway from multiple angles, making 3 normal-sized cars look like some illegal parking lot. Let's begin. Linda slammed down her glittery pink gavel on the podium. She had intentionally scheduled this emergency meeting on a Tuesday evening, when she knew most working families wouldn't be able to attend. made it a point to be present sitting in the back. I quietly observed her routine act unfold, as you can see from these professional photographs. She started clicking through a PowerPoint presentation. Mr. Carter's yard has become a used car lot. A few gasps from her loyal followers. The same individuals whose Christmas lights stayed up until March, without a fine, Mrs. Rodriguez. My elderly neighbor rolled her eyes last month. She had received a ticket because her grandson's car was in her driveway while he worked on her roof. Mr. Chang, a high school science teacher, took angry notes he had received a citation for parking his car barely over his own driveway line during a snowstorm. Linda clicked to the next slide, zooming in on my daughter's car. This vehicle, she said smugly, has been parked in the same spot for over 48 hours. She forgot to mention my daughter was home from college for the weekend. The meeting went on as Linda paraded spurious complaints from anonymous neighbors, cherry-picked property value statistics, and even weather reports, showing my cars were causing excess snowdrifts. Then she pulled out a thick binder. I've documented every time vehicles have come and gone. Mr. Carter's property the past 3 months, my eyebrows rose. She had been tracking my family's comings and goings. A few of the neighbors squirmed uncomfortably. That's when Sarah Jenkins, my next-door neighbor, rose to her feet. Linda, isn't this getting a little excessive? They're just regular cars in a regular driveway. Linda's face reddened. You're out of order. You haven't been recognized by the chair? It was my turn. I rose slowly to my feet, adjusting my tie point of order. Madam President? Linda's eyes narrowed. You're not recognized. Mr. Carter actually, I said, pulling out a folder according to HOA bylaw section. 73. Any property owner may raise a point of order regarding voting procedure. Silence. Linda's grip tightened on the podium before we vote. I continued stepping forward. I believe it's important to review the HOA's current property ownership structure. I pulled out a large property map for the past 5 years. Sunrise Properties has been acquiring homes in this development. Linda's face paled as I placed my final document on the table. As CEO of Sunrise Properties, I now own 67% of the homes in this NA neighborhood. An uproar swept through the room, which means I announced, locking eyes with her. I now own this HOA, Linda. Overturned her gavel. Her husband, George, rushed over to whisper in her ear. Her hands trembled as she finally knew who she had been tangling with all these years. I smiled. Let's discuss those remaining $50,000 in pool renovation expenses been flagged by the chair I watched, as Linda's husband, George, started handing out copies of a new proposed bylaw one. That would limit each residence to 2 cars and require garage parking. Only the absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. Almost will now vote on the new vehicle limitation and fee increase. Linda said, not even bothering to allow discussion, all in favor. That was my cue. I stood slowly to my feet, straightening my tie point of order. Madam President, Linda's eyes narrowed as she looked at me over her reading glasses. You're not recognized. Mr. Carter, actually, I responded, pulling out my own folder, according to HOA bylaw section 73. Any property owner may bring a point of order regarding voting procedures. The room fell silent. I could see Linda's perfectly manicured nails gripping the podium tightly before we vote. I think it's essential to review the HOA's current property ownership structure. I started to walk toward the front of the room, my shoes clicking on the linoleum floor. You see, over the last 5 years, Sunrise Properties has been purchasing homes in this development. Linda's face started to drain of color as I pulled out a large property map. And as CEO of Sunrise Properties, I thought it might be interesting to know who exactly owns the majority of this HOA. I halted, making eye contact with all of the board members. But perhaps we should discuss that after we look at these questionable surveillance activities you've been conducting. The room erupted in murmurs in my peripheral vision. I could see phones coming out, neighbors recording every moment. Linda's hand trembled as she reached for her water bottle, inadvertently knocking over her precious gavel in the process. That's when George moved into the podium, whispering something in her ear. Her eyes widened as she belatedly realized who she'd been playing all these years. The conference room fell silent as I stood up. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. Linda's smug smile started to slip as I pulled out my leather briefcase before we vote on these new fees. I said I have something I need to tell all of you. I clicked open my briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of property deeds, placing them one by one on the table. Each paper was another piece of my secret plan falling into place. The room was alive with whispers. As I stood them up in neat rows for the past 5 years, I kept at it. I've watched this HOA board ignore major maintenance issues while harassing good neighbors over minuscule things. I've watched Linda here cite Mrs. Avery, who's 82 years old, for having a flower pot 1 inch too tall, while her friend Susan's bright purple fence somehow never got a single warning. Linda's face reddened. That's not true. I enforce all rules equally. She reached for her water bottle, but her hand was shaking so badly, she spilled some on her designer blouse. I pulled up photos on the meeting room's big screen. Here's Linda measuring my grass at 3 a.m. Last Tuesday, the security camera footage was clear as day. Several people gasped, and here she is overlooking the Thompsons' infractions, all together right after they hired her son's landscaping business. More whispers permeated the room. I could see individuals starting to nod, remembering their own experiences with Linda's selective enforcement. But the most interesting thing I discovered, I kept picking up the stack of deeds, is that through my company, Sunrise Property, I now own 67% of the homes in this development. I paused as the implication sunk in. That makes me the majority owner of the HOA itself. Linda jumped up, knocking over her chair. You can't do that. It's not allowed. Her voice had become squeaky with fear. I smiled calmly. Actually, I can. I've had 3 different law firms go over everything. It's perfectly legal. I pulled out another folder. I also have signed complaints from 32 residents about harassment, selective enforcement, and suspicious fees. The room erupted. Mrs. Avery stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. Last winter, they fined me $200 for not shoveling my walkway fast enough. I was hospitalized with pneumonia. Others shared their stories. Linda tried to restore order, pounding her gavel, but no one was listening to her anymore. I moved to disband the current board. I announced we'll hold new elections with term limits and brief rules about conflict of interest, no more. 3 a.m., grass measuring, no more selective enforcement. Bob Chang from 2 doors down spoke up. I second that motion. Soon hands were being raised all around the room. Linda grabbed her designer purse and made a beeline for the door. This meeting is adjourned, she yelled. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, actually. I said, still composed, section 7.3. Of HOA bylaws calls for a majority vote to adjourn, and I don't think you have that anymore. I motioned to the deeds spread out on the table. We're just getting started. She halted with her hand on the doorknob, realizing her power was fading. 20 years of dictatorially ruling the neighborhood with an iron fist were coming to an end. Now I kept opening another folder. Let's talk about those mysterious pool renovation fees last summer, the ones where $50,000 disappeared. But the pool never did get renovated. I have some interesting bank records to share with you. Linda leaned back against the wall, her face pale. She hadn't noticed yet, but a local news van had just pulled into the parking lot. I had invited them to cover our community reorganization meeting. The next few hours would change our neighborhood forever. But first, we had years of Linda secrets to untangle, and I had every single receipt. My careful planning was finally working, and the best part, it wasn't finished yet. I walked into my lawyer's office Monday morning to find 20 angry voicemails from Linda. She had unearthed my company's property records over the weekend and was threatening to sue me for secretly taking over the neighborhood. I couldn't help but smile. She had finally revealed her true colors. But Linda wasn't just angry. She was afraid. That night she went door to door, spreading rumors that I was going to turn our quiet suburb into a parking lot for my car collection. Some of the neighbors actually believed her, especially after she showed them fake documents indicating I had ties to a sleazy development company. I knew I had to act fast. My security cameras caught Linda trespassing on my property at midnight, taking close-up photos of my car's license plates. The next day, she sued me for having supposedly broken HOA rules by purchasing properties in my company's name. She even tried to get an emergency court order to stop my voting rights in the HOA. That's when months of behind-the-scenes planning paid off. My lawyer brought out our ace in the hole, a diligent record of all HOA meeting. For the past 5 years, we had videos of Linda giving her friends passes on their violations, while strictly citing others. We had copies of checks where she spent HOA money landscaping her own backyard. Best of all, we had emails where she bragged about using her power to keep undesirables out of the neighborhood. The judge's eyes widened with each piece of evidence. Linda's face turned red when we showed time-stamped video of her measuring my grasp with a ruler at 3 a.m. Her reign of terror was taking photos of my teenage daughter's car and leaving threatening notes on my neighbors' doors. Linda Marshall had gone too far. Her lawyer started to sweat when we presented evidence that she had changed HOA records to hide her friends' unpaid dues. But the biggest shock came when 3 former board members stepped forward. They testified to how Linda had bullied them into enacting unfair rules, admitted to selectively going after certain homeowners she didn't like, and even boasted about using HOA fines to pay for her annual trips to Hawaii. The court fell strangely silent as we showed Linda's social media posts, taunting elderly homeowners who couldn't afford their HOA payments. There, she was poolside in Maui, writing about her post, "Thanks to all my rule-breaking neighbors for paying for this vacation. Keep those violations coming." Linda tried defending herself, saying she was just doing her job. But then we played the recording from last month's HOA meeting, where she had screamed at Mrs. Avery, our 75-year-old neighbor, for having a bird feeder that was 2 inches too low. That was the moment Linda snapped. She jumped up from her chair, pointing an accusing finger at me. "He's trying to destroy our perfect neighborhood," she sobbed. "Do you know what kind of people will move in if we don't have strict rules? He probably wants to make this one of those neighborhoods where you can park wherever you want." The judge had heard enough. Not only did he dismiss Linda's lawsuit, but he ordered a full audit of the HOA's finances. As we were leaving the courthouse, my phone was exploding with texts from neighbors. Linda had just sent out a mass email announcing her immediate resignation from the board, saying she was being pushed out by big money interests. I saw her storming to her car, already furiously typing away on her phone. I knew this wasn't over. Linda still had loyal followers in the neighborhood, and she wasn't the type to back down easily. But for the time being, I had what I needed: proof that our HOA president had been abusing her power for years, and the legal standing for implementing actual changes. The morning of the final court hearing came with a surprise. Linda had sent a fleet of news van to my house, thinking public pressure would make me back down, but she had just given me the perfect stage. I straightened my tie, grabbed my documents, and walked up to the reporters with a confident smile. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Daniel Carter, and I'd love to show you something interesting about our HOA's financial records." I pulled out the color-coded spreadsheets my accountant had prepared, showing years of suspicious fees that always seemed to benefit Linda's closest friends. The reporter's eyes widened as I explained how single parents had been fined more violation fees than her golf partners. One reporter gasped when I showed security video of Linda measuring my grass at 3 a.m., while her own yard violated every rule in the book inside the courthouse. Linda sat beside her high-priced lawyer, wearing her signature fake pearl necklace and a smug smile. That smile vanished as soon as my lawyer began presenting evidence. We showed photos of Linda's own house breaking multiple HOA regulations, her bright purple mailbox, her overgrown garden, and her son's 4 cars parked on the street. The judge leaned forward as we revealed Linda's secret Facebook group, where she bragged about going after specific families. Let's see how long the Carters last with these new fees she had written. Maybe they'll just move and sell to someone more suitable. Linda jumped up to object, but came to a stop when we played a recording from last week's HOA pool party. Her voice rang out in the courtroom. "Of course I make up violations. How else are we going to keep control over who lives here?" The judge's gavel came down loudly. Not only was Linda permanently removed from the HOA board, but she was also made to refund every unjust fee she had cold collected. The look on her face when she heard the amount, $147,800, more than any revenge. I could have thought up with my majority ownership. I helped put in a new HOA board with real change. We elected 5 residents from different parts of the neighborhood, including Mrs. Rodriguez, who Linda had tried to find for cooking ethnic food, and Mr. Chang, whose beautiful garden Linda found too exotic. The changes were quick. Kids could now play basketball in their driveways. Gardens could have vegetables, not just flowers, but she had just given me the perfect stage. I straightened my tie, grabbed my documents, and walked up to the reporters with a confident smile. Good morning, everyone. I'm Daniel Carter, and I'd love to show you something interesting about our HOA's financial records. I pulled out the color-coded spreadsheets my accountant had prepared, showing years of suspicious fees that always seemed to benefit Linda's closest friends. The reporter's eyes widened as I explained how single parents had been fined more violation fees than her golf partners. One reporter gasped when I showed security video of Linda measuring my grass at 3 a.m., while her own yard violated every rule in the book inside the courthouse. Linda sat beside her high-priced lawyer, wearing her signature fake pearl necklace and a smug smile. That smile vanished as soon as my lawyer began presenting evidence. We showed photos of Linda's own house breaking multiple HOA regulations, her bright purple mailbox, her overgrown garden, and her son's 4 cars parked on the street. The judge leaned forward as we revealed Linda's secret Facebook group, where she bragged about going after specific families. Let's see how long the Carters last with these new fees she had written. Maybe they'll just move and sell to someone more suitable. Linda jumped up to object, but came to a stop when we played a recording from last week's HOA pool party. Her voice rang out in the courtroom. Of course I make up violations. How else are we going to keep control over who lives here? The judge's gavel came down loudly. Not only was Linda permanently removed from the HOA board, but she was also made to refund every unjust fee she had collected. The look on her face when she heard the amount, $147,800, more than any revenge. I could have thought up with my majority ownership. I helped put in a new HOA board with real change. We elected 5 residents from different parts of the neighborhood, including Mrs. Rodriguez, who Linda had tried to find for cooking ethnic food, and Mr. Chang, whose beautiful garden Linda found too exotic. The changes were quick. Kids could now play basketball in their driveways. Gardens could have vegetables, not just flowers,